So it's finally time for us to go ahead and talk about the iPhone 13 Pro and see how this particular iPhone holds up in 2025. Now, the big thing to keep in mind here, in my personal opinion, is that I really do love my iPhone 13 Pro. I think this is easily one of the better deals you can buy in this particular year, and there is still a lot to love about this type of phone. You know, when I actually take a look at my iPhone 13 Pro and I compare it even against my iPhone 16 Pro, I'm actually shocked by how good of a job this particular device does. You know, it's not perfect. There's obviously some clear issues, but I think the 13 Pro still does a really good job in a majority of things. There might be some better phones I'd recommend though, especially from a price tag standpoint. So we'll take a look at that throughout this whole entire video. But if you want to pick up this phone or some other phones for the cheapest prices, links will be down in the description below. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPhone 13 Pro, this particular phone came out back in 2021. So it is a little bit older now. You know, it's turning basically 4 years old this year. So that can be kind of a turnoff for some people. But when you are taking a look at this particular device, you have to remember that this was a beautiful, beautiful phone when it first came out, and it still holds up fairly well. You're getting a 6.1-inch Super Retina XDR OLED display. So within this type of panel and this type of device, it is a fairly good looking device for the most part. Right? You're getting kind of thin bezels on it. You're getting a 120 Hz display, 1200 nits of brightness, a notch up top, Face ID. Like, this is a phone that in some ways holds up very, very well, and in other ways doesn't really hold up that well anymore. And I'll get into that in more detail, but the brightness could be higher. You know, the notch could have been removed for the dynamic island, things like that. But for a 4-year-old phone, I think that kind of makes sense, right? This is kind of what a majority of phones were holding up back then. You're getting your reflective side around it, flat side, lightning port at the bottom, which is really, really nice to have still kind of, even though, you know, USB Type-C is better. And on the back side, you're basically getting our frosted glass back, which is still amazing to have. Triple camera setup with a LiDAR sensor. You're still getting your MagSafe capability, IP certification. There is still a lot to love about a phone like this, right? So I always want you to kind of think about, if you're going to go through and like pick up a device, you are pretty much still going to feel like you're getting a really, really good device from something like this, because it still holds up very well for the most part from like that side. Right? Now, some things in some areas where this phone probably isn't holding up the best in, we'll kind of hit on that right now. Number one, this phone, the brightness side of things, it's not really holding up the best when it does come down to the brightness, right? It's 1200 nits. It's not terrible, but it would have been nicer had this thing had a little bit more capability there, like maybe like 15 or 1600 or 1700 nits. But again, for a phone that came out at that time, I totally get it. Like, it completely makes sense to me. But again, maybe it would have been nice had we had a little bit more brightness there. On top of that, the lack of USB Type-C can be kind of annoying, right? All iPhones now have USB-C. It's almost like going backwards buying a phone with Lightning, but I get it. Like, it makes sense to me. But that is just one of those other things you're going to have to keep in mind here if you're going to go through and pick up a device. And on top of that, another big thing here is the notch. Maybe the notch is a big deal to you. It can be kind of annoying. Switching over to dynamic island might be a little nicer for some people. But other than that, I think this phone still holds up fairly well when compared to even like an iPhone 16 Pro. When it comes down to the price tag though, this is one of my favorite things about this phone. This phone is a sub $400 phone in a lot of places. Of course, you can go and find it in a different area and, maybe it'll be more expensive, cheaper, but I would say around $400 or less than that. That is a very, very good competitive price to pay for a phone like this. This device has a lot of capability, and for a phone of this caliber, it is actually fairly interesting that you are able to go and buy a phone like this that doesn't really cost that much money. So I think that in and of itself as well is another very interesting thing going on for this device when it comes down to it as well. Now, on top of that, when we're going to take a look at this particular device, you're going to have to remember that with something like an iPhone 13 Pro, the camera on this thing is still actually pretty decent, right? It's still giving you a triple camera setup on the backside. So you're getting a 12 megapixel wide, 12 megapixel telephoto, and then a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera. Then you're also getting a 12 megapixel wide angle camera on the front side. So when you are going through and if you are buying a phone like this, you're pretty much going to be getting a device, in my opinion, that is still going to be holding up fairly well. So if you are purchasing a phone like this, if you're still going to be getting devices like this, you're still going to be getting a device that is going to be holding up fairly well from that particular side. So I think this in and of itself is one of those important things to keep in mind here, because you are still able to go through, pick up a device like this, still get a lot of capability there. And the camera itself, 4K at 60 on the back, 4K at 60 on the front. This is still a lot of really, really good stuff to have inside of a device. So kind of keep that in mind. Although this thing's not like perfect or anything, it still is very nice to be able to go ahead and like pick up a device like this at the end of the day. So kind of keep that in mind. So I think the camera here still gets a thumbs up for me. Now on top of that, another very big thing to keep in mind here too is the fact that with the iPhone 13 Pro, this device is still supported with software, right? It's still getting iOS updates, and it's still going to be supported with software for quite some time. So I think it's still probably going to be getting like another like 3 years of iOS updates. I could be wrong, but it's probably going to be something around that. So that is in and of itself a nice thing to basically have, right? If you're going to be able to, pick up a phone like this, you're still going to be getting devices that still hold up fairly well from a software, performance perspective. So that in and of itself, again, is another pretty nice thing going on for this type of device too. Now, on top of that, another very important thing to keep in mind here as well is with the iPhone 13 Pro, this device, for the most part, the battery life of it is not terrible, right? 3095 milliamp battery. You have to remember that this phone has degraded a little bit. So especially if you're buying it in the used market, you're probably going to be seeing this thing is probably not going to be holding up too well when it comes down to, the battery life and everything like that for the most part. But it's not terrible, and it's kind of what you'd expect from like an older device like this. So once again, I think that in and of itself is another one of those important things to keep in mind, because if you are going to go through and if you're going to pick up a device, it is nice to kind of remember that if you're going through picking up phones and, picking up whatever, that you aren't really going to be missing out on too much if you're going through and picking up a device like this. So once again, I think that in and of itself is another one of those maybe minor things, maybe major things that you have to kind of think about. And from a performance perspective side, this particular device is still giving you a pretty solid performing phone. So the thing that I really love and really appreciate about this particular device is that with my iPhone 13 Pro, this device is still giving you that Apple A15 Bionic chip inside of it, and it's still giving you 6 gigabytes of RAM. So this right there, those types of things are such important things to have inside of your devices. If you're able to go through and pick up a phone or pick up a device of any sort, like I said, it's really nice to have a device like this because it is going to be holding up fairly well from a device perspective, especially from performance. For basic applications or for major applications, you're still going to be getting a really good time from this thing. And I do think this in and of itself is one of those important things to keep in mind, because you're able to go through and still pick up a device and still be able to pick up these types of phones and still get a lot of capability there when it comes down to it. So I think when it comes down to the performance, this device is also giving you a fairly solid, performing device here too. So overall, to be honest with you, I think the iPhone 13 Pro is a very, very good device for the price tag. I think if you're going to go through and pick up a phone, this is one of the solid phones that you can go and, kind of get going on it. I think it's a very good phone. I think it has a lot of capability. Is it perfect? Probably not. But I do think for the most part, like I mentioned before, Apple did a really good job with this phone. The only phones I'd recommend more than this thing are devices maybe like the iPhone, 14 Pro and iPhone 15 Pro and 16 Pro. Those are maybe the main ones I'd recommend on top of this one. But other than that, I don't think you can go that wrong with this one. And I think this thing is still worth buying for the most part as well. So that pretty much covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.